Every 4 years, millions of us head to the polls, believing our votes will change the world. But what if I told you that voting might not make a real difference at all? Shocking, right? Studies show that over 60% of Americans feel their vote doesn't count. In fact, a Princeton study found that average citizens have little to no influence on political outcomes, while the wealthy control most decisions. Think about it. In the last election, around 150 million Americans voted, yet the same issues, like income inequality and healthcare, persist. Politicians promise change but often deliver little more than empty words. Why is this happening? It's because many of the forces shaping our lives operate far from the voting booth. In this video, we'll dive deep into the reasons why your vote might achieve nothing. We'll explore how the illusion of choice keeps us complacent, how shadowy groups pull the strings behind the scenes, and why real change often happens outside the ballot box. Get ready to uncover the truth about voting, power, and the fight for a better future. You might just be surprised at what you discover. Chapter 1: The illusion of choice. In every election, voters are told they have the power to shape the future. But how real is this power? Many political theorists argue that we are trapped in what's called the illusion of choice. The idea is simple: no matter who we vote for, the system stays the same. In fact, political scientist Thomas Ferguson once described elections as a thin veil drawn over vast economic interests. The same corporations, donors, and lobbyists often back candidates from both sides. So, while we think we're choosing between two opposing ideas, we might just be choosing between two sides of the same coin. Take the United States, for example. A Princeton University study found that the preferences of average citizens have little to no influence on public policy. In contrast, the wealthy and well-connected wield significant control. This is not just theory, it's been backed by data. The top 1% of Americans hold more wealth than the bottom 90% combined, and their political contributions reflect this. These donors influence key policies that benefit their interests, regardless of which party is in power. We're also conditioned to think that our vote can bring change. But in reality, big issues like healthcare, corporate taxes, and foreign policy tend to remain remarkably consistent across different administrations. Barack Obama's presidency, for example, saw little rollback of the sweeping surveillance state set up by George W. Bush. And while Donald Trump campaigned on populist themes, many of his policies aligned closely with traditional Republican economic orthodoxy. It's as if elections serve more as performances to maintain a system, rather than tools for meaningful change. Chapter 2: Shadow Governments. Who really pulls the strings? We like to think our elected leaders are in control. But often, they are not. Behind every policy decision lies a web of unelected power players, corporations, think tanks, military elites, and foreign interests. This network of influence is what some call a shadow government. And no, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's well-documented fact. Take the military-industrial complex, a term coined by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1961. He warned that powerful defense contractors could gain unwarranted influence over policy decisions. His fears have proven accurate. In the years since, U.S. foreign policy has been shaped not just by elected officials, but by lobbyists representing companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing. These defense giants profit enormously from war and military spending, influencing decisions that keep the U.S. engaged in endless conflicts abroad. Another example of hidden influence is the pharmaceutical industry. In 2020, the pharmaceutical lobby spent over $300 million on lobbying efforts in the US alone. This money isn't just for show, it's used to ensure policies favoring drug companies, even if they hurt consumers. It's why the cost of healthcare remains high, regardless of which party is in power. One striking quote comes from sociologist C. Wright Mills, who said in his book The Power Elite, "The men of the higher circles are not representative men, their high position is not a result of moral virtue, superior skill, or greater talent. These shadowy forces are unelected and often unaccountable, yet they have the power to dictate the policies that shape our lives." When we vote, we aren't just choosing a president or a senator, we're unknowingly endorsing the power structures that work behind the scenes. Chapter 3: The Election Cycle Trap. Voting as a distraction. We live in a world where every 4 years, we're told our votes will bring change. But this focus on election cycles may actually be a distraction from deeper problems. Voting becomes a ritual, a way for us to feel involved, even if the real issues are never addressed. The constant focus on elections shifts attention away from systemic problems that can't be fixed by simply electing a new leader. Economist Joseph Schumpeter argued that democracy is more about competition between elites than it is about representing the will of the people. He described elections as the method by which the will of the people is manufactured. In other words, elections can be more about managing public expectations than making real changes. This might explain why voter turnout in countries like the US hovers around just 60%. People are losing faith that their vote will make a difference. One glaring issue is that politicians are always thinking about the next election. This short-term focus means they often avoid making tough decisions that might upset voters, even if those decisions are necessary for long-term change. Think about climate change. Despite overwhelming evidence of the crisis, many governments still drag their feet on meaningful action because it could hurt them politically. They know that bold climate policies might cost them support from powerful industries or certain voter blocs. In the meantime, voters are left with little to no say on long-term issues like economic inequality, the climate crisis, or the erosion of civil liberties. These problems require sustained effort and systemic changes, things that are nearly impossible to tackle in an election cycle. So, while we obsess over who will win the next election, we're distracted from the fact that these cycles rarely bring about the real change we need. If you find this discussion thought-provoking, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Join us as we continue exploring the complexities of voting and power dynamics. Chapter 4: Divide and Conquer. How partisanship weakens democracy. We all know politics is divisive, but what if division itself is the strategy? It seems like modern politics thrives on keeping people divided. Left versus right, liberal versus conservative, these labels can easily cloud bigger issues. Political parties have mastered the art of turning small differences into large battles. By keeping voters focused on fighting each other, they avoid conversations about the deeper, systemic problems both sides face. Political theorist Noam Chomsky calls this tactic manufactured conflict. He argues that when people are busy bickering about wedge issues, like gun rights or immigration, they're distracted from corporate influence or economic inequality, which affects everyone. This division is useful to those in power because it keeps the public distracted and fragmented. In fact, data shows that hyper-partisanship is on the rise. A 2021 study from the Pew Research Center revealed that 83% of voters see the opposing party as a threat to the nation's well-being. This extreme division keeps people emotionally invested in politics but often paralyzes them from demanding real change. Voters get so wrapped up in defeating the other side that they don't realize how similar their struggles are to those of their political opponents. The media plays a huge role in this, too. In a profit-driven media landscape, conflict sells. Media outlets thrive on sensational headlines that inflame partisan identities. This keeps viewers glued to their screens, while more important stories, like corporate corruption or climate change, are sidelined. By keeping people divided, politicians can more easily control the narrative and avoid addressing structural changes. It's a classic divide and conquer strategy. People are so focused on being right or defeating the other side that they don't notice how much common ground they might share. In the end, the only winners are those who benefit from a divided and distracted public. Chapter 5: False Promises and Empty Rhetoric. The language of politicians. Ever notice how politicians seem to promise the moon during campaigns, only to deliver far less? This is no accident. Politicians have become experts at crafting speeches filled with vague, feel-good rhetoric that sounds great but lacks any real substance. They've learned how to appeal to our hopes and fears, without committing to much of anything. This is what political analysts call empty rhetoric, words that sound important but mean little. For example, a candidate might promise economic growth or better opportunities for all, but these phrases are so broad they could mean almost anything. They don't outline clear policies or measurable goals. And once the election is over, those grand promises are often forgotten. A great example is the phrase, hope and change, which Barack Obama used during his 2008 campaign. While it inspired millions, many policies under his administration, like financial regulation or healthcare reform, ended up favoring corporate interests more than working-class Americans. This isn't to say his presidency didn't achieve anything, but it highlights how powerful slogans can be, even when the follow-through is weaker. Another tactic politicians use is called dog whistle politics. This is when they use coded language that appeals to certain groups without alienating others. For instance, phrases like law and order or family values may seem neutral but are often meant to signal specific, controversial policies. It allows politicians to play both sides without taking a clear stance. Even campaign platforms are filled with empty rhetoric. According to a study by the University of Rochester, only 67% of major campaign promises from U.S. presidential candidates from 1976 to 2012 were kept. This shows a pattern: promise big, deliver small. The public is left disillusioned, while politicians move on to the next election cycle, ready to make the same promises again. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe for more insights into the political landscape and how we can work together for real change. Your voice matters, and together we can make a difference.